Hi everybody, Adrian Plass here.
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
Number 96 this is. And I have to say, in case we suddenly cough or fade, we're not in the best of health because we just found that we are positive when we measured ourselves for COVID. And
so we're finally, after 2 years, we've joined the COVID club.
Yeah.
Almost a relief, really, to have finally looked at that little tester kit and seen 2 lines and think, right, well now I've got it. And
I think we said that we're better late than earlier.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, you remember how terrifying
so
it was.
really.
We really are. And some people are still living with the appalling grief of seeing
of course they are.
families dying in terrible states and terribly lonely.
Yeah, of course.
But anyway, that's what we've got, and I guess we'll have a few days of dealing with that. But here we are. Oh, we are. We
as
are.
long as we don't cough at you, we'll be fine.
I'm not sure cops can travel
well, I don't
through
know. The volume of ours, you never know. Might do. Last week we were talking about little things and how they can make such an enormous difference. And there was a couple of emails in particular, wasn't there, we'd like to share with you. And one was somebody who's been in hospital. And she was talking about, she said that all her life she'd always wanted big things from God, dramatic things, finding special words in the Bible, all that sort of thing. And she's been thinking so much about what we were saying because she actually has a little list, and then she'll explain her little list, Adrian.
Right.
First of all, when she was in hospital, and it was obviously a pretty rotten time, she had a room with a view, with a window, which I know most people who've been in hospital will know, to be by the window where you can look out. So that was number one. She had a Cadfael book. Right. And she had Anne of Green Gables on Netflix, which she found, and an early morning cup of sweet tea. And what she said was that the room with a view was such a shock because she could see over the Wiltshire Hills to Salisbury Cathedral. And she found that absolutely fantastic. Yeah. Cadfael simply because she loves him as she's always loved Father Brown, because of the combination of humanity and godliness. Anne of Green Gables Netflix, she said it kept her sane at 11 o'clock, waiting for an IV transfusion, which was very late. And the cup of sweet tea, because being very short-staffed in the hospital, they couldn't always get that early drink round, and you often had to wait for 2 or 3 hours for your breakfast. And somebody on the night shift had said, what would make a difference? And she said, I'd love an early morning cup of tea. And she had it. Yeah. And I don't know. She said, and these are exactly what she said. She said, I felt noticed, cared for, and loved with that cup of tea. The very thing that our Heavenly Father wants us to experience.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? I was a little bit like that when I was in hospital recently. I can remember someone making me a cup of tea at a time when you didn't usually have tea. Yeah. And it seems impossible to understand when you're not in there. Yeah. But to have someone go off to do that and take the trouble is really means something, doesn't it?
To know that there you are in your bed, you're a person who jolly well could do with a cup of tea.
Needs a cup of tea.
Yes, it's such a natural thing, isn't it?
And we had another one from an old correspondent and friend of ours who lives in Australia. And he was talking about the fact that he used to work on a payroll, and if he's listening now, he'll know we're talking about him. And a few of the employees at this place were on workers' compensation, and in other words, they were injured.
They were injured at work, which is why they got it.
Access their pay.
No, some of them couldn't access their pay slip online. That was the problem.
So he would post it to them, and he would add a little message each time, something very simple like "Hope you're doing." Okay. I mean, not huge things, but hope the sunshine in your day was another one. And he said that when he was made redundant, lots of response saying what that meant to people. Yeah. I think this is, people talk about what are your riches. I seriously think that you can bring a little bit of joy into people's lives by taking a tiny bit of extra trouble.
Yeah, I love thinking of these little yellow Post-its going out on the payslip. They weren't just somebody receiving workers' compensation.
No.
They were more than the payslip, more than the bureaucracy.
It's also, every now and then I try to phone somebody who, for no reason at all, especially someone who I haven't seen for a long time, and it's a great thing to do, just to say hello and say how you're doing, because you never know, do you?
No.
Anyway, thank you for those.
It was such a big contrast, wasn't it? Really, with some of the stuff coming out of Ukraine this week, and I mean, we could talk forever, couldn't we? All of us have conversations about our reaction to some of the horror that has been discovered as Ukraine take back some of these villages. And one of them, you know how sometimes one story kind of stabs you in the heart almost more than others. And this was a woman talking about the fact that it's just so sad, I can hardly say it really. Her husband, who she'd loved for years and who she said was a very good man and a very kind man, and these Russian soldiers arrived, dragged them outside, made him take his jumper off, and shot him in the head because they were Nazis.
But because they said
you're
they were a Nazi family.
Yeah. And it was as though the label put on them gave these soldiers permission to be the very, very worst of themselves. For that moment, and jointly, we talked, didn't we, about sometimes there being a culture of something, and it feels as though there's a almost a feral culture of being able to do whatever you happen to want to do, and find it really doesn't touch you at all
because you've been given permission.
Because you've been given permission. I
remember the horror of hearing about the Milgram experiment after the war.
Exactly.
Where people were asked to volunteer to go to this centre where they were asked to put an increasingly high amount of electric current into people sitting on chairs, up to the point where they might have killed them. And if they resisted, they said, well, no, we're in charge. These men in white coats said, no, I might have got this a little wrong, but they took responsibility. Not all gave in, I have to say.
No.
But some did, because authority can be very dominant in some people's lives. But make it possible, and who knows what this makes me sick.
I know.
It really makes me feel sick.
It also makes me feel, sometimes I think when we're trying to follow Jesus, when we're trying to be part of his gang, if you like, we don't necessarily realise that by continually trying to see things through Jesus' eyes, we do maybe see things that maybe we wouldn't have done. I mean, and maybe the worst part of our nature might have developed a bit more than, I don't know, I'm wittering. But I was thinking about when we were in Peru.
Never witter.
We will continue.
I'm about to cough. Hold on. Sorry. No.
You started
No, we're all right.
We're not allowed to laugh. We're not allowed to cough.
I apologise.
No, when first time we went to South America, and it was with Toybots, wasn't it? Working with, who work
charity,
with agencies with street children.
That's right,
And I remember the very first bit of information that I said about a stab through the heart. I mean, having worked with children as we have for so many years in different ways, to hear that children who have ended up on the streets, which obviously isn't a choice thing, were considered, well, they were actually called vermin, weren't they?
By a large number of the police.
A large number of the police who actually sometimes were able to actually shoot them, but also it meant that they were open to being abused. They had no birth certificates, so they had no rights at all. They couldn't even go to school if they wanted to. And some of the work, I mean, we could talk forever about it if we weren't coughing so much.
It's interesting that the birth certificate thing, I mean, we've tried to do a lot of sponsoring and getting people to support things like these charities, but the birth certificate, somehow it was so vivid that if a child has a birth certificate,
yes,
he or she can do all sorts of things that they can't do if they haven't.
Absolutely, because they exist.
Yeah, and people
because they're not vermin. They are a child with a name. Absolutely.
People were very
I think
generous.
Toybots are still doing that, actually.
I hope so. Yeah.
But I was thinking particularly, Adrian, we were thinking about things that kind of cut through, like the Postit on the payslip. And I was thinking of when we first met that group of teenage street children, because we'd met some children, little children, working with a street educator. Yeah. And that was very endearing and lovely. But then we were told we were going to meet these teenagers. And do you remember, we went up on this bridge and there were no kids there at all. And then gradually, one by one, they seemed to crawl out from underneath the bridge, from holes under the bridge where they spent a lot of their time. And do you remember our first...
And they were a very rough-looking crowd.
Oh, my goodness, because they sniff glue. I mean, that's one of the things that helps them to survive. A lot of them sniff glue. Yeah. And so their poor faces, their mouths are swollen, they've got blotches. And because they're living in dirt, they were filthy, they were... And so thin, a lot of them. And there they were, this extraordinary little gaggle of kids. Yeah. And they
were, some of them were older teenagers, weren't they? They're quite a variety of ages, but obviously they belonged together in some sense. Yeah. And
we had something with us, didn't we? That we had no idea whether we were going to be able to use, that you'd got from somebody. I wonder if
people could guess what it was. We happened to take something that was incredibly useful. It was useful in the middle of the night in Bolivia.
Yes.
It was useful with these people we're talking about now, and with all sorts of other, mainly boys, I have to say, because...
And mainly teenagers,
That's Adrian. Right, because what we had... we have a friend, or had a friend, who worked for health and safety at Manchester United.
Yeah.
And when he heard we were going to Peru, or going to South America, he gave us loads of photos of the team.
Yeah, they were like postcards, weren't they, with photos of the team.
And little badges.
Little Man U badges, absolutely.
And when you were with these lads on the bank of the river by the bridge, or with the clipped shoe cleaners at midnight in another place, they took these and looked at them avidly and knew the name of every player.
Yeah, they did.
And for them, it was as though another culture had moved straight into their own. It is
true
wonderful.
That we did have to kind of fudge the area of our friend being in health and safety, because that wasn't terrible, didn't make a great connection.
I think he was promoted to something quite close to the upper echelons of Manchester United.
But I suppose what it did was, just for a little while, they didn't see themselves as vermin or as people who need to hide in a hole. They were teenagers who knew the names of all of the Manchester... And there was a Peruvian player at the time whose name I didn't know then. I certainly don't know now. But it was a link, wasn't it? It was. Yeah. But do you remember that we then had the challenge, because... And I think it's a challenge that...
It's quite interesting. If you give people something...
Yeah.
There is... quite often a part of them that wants to give something back.
Yeah.
And these lads, they were all boys actually, sitting on the bank there, they looked at us and they looked at each other, and I think a couple of them went off.
No, if you remember, they collected tiny bits of money from each of them.
That's right.
Tiny amounts, until they had enough.
And they went off to buy something. We don't know what it was. And when they brought it back, it was a form of sweet...
sort of yogurty stuff that you buy from a street stall, wasn't it?
And we've been told, don't eat anything...
From any street stall. And certainly...
From kids who've just crawled out from under the bridge, but probably
and we shared
definitely not.
A spoon. And that was the thing that, I mean, as I said, they have sores around their mouths, they had... we were going against every rule.
Well, there was the question, wasn't it, before we actually get to it?
Yeah.
There's one spoon. There's a group of people who really wanted and had searched within themselves to find something they could give back to us.
That's right.
So did we use the spoon? Did we eat the sweet yogurt? Well, I don't think there's a right answer to this.
No, neither do I.
But we did. And I suppose we just thought, well, we can't bring ourselves to
But if you're talking about small differences, we will never know, will we? And we're not elevating it into something grand. We will never know whether that encounter meant anything to them. But at that moment, it did.
Yeah,
at that moment in time, they did feel, what were the words that Wendy said? She said, noticed, cared for, and loved. And I think in a funny way, that was what happened then.
Yeah.
It was really, yeah.
We had some wonderful contacts with kids, didn't we? And life is never as simple as people think it might be.
No.
But a lot of the younger kids in particular had a culture within the unhoused world, the world of those who had nowhere to live.
Yeah.
And
but also
getting them to go and join a project
was really hard.
But
also, they were kids. And do you remember we had a meal once, and it was, you asked them, do you know any jokes?
Oh, yes.
These were children who, well, it's too complicated to talk about now, really, but it was a special day for children who'd been kind of chosen out of each group of children in all the different projects, and they were there for the day.
We were sitting at a long table,
yeah,
weren't
we were. Yeah. And do you remember the joke?
Yes, I thought, I wonder how many jokes travel round the world.
Yeah.
So I said, through the translator, I'm sure.
Oh, yes, of course it was through the translator.
I am now going to tell you a joke, and the joke begins with a question, and then you have to answer it. So if anybody knows the answer, as soon as I've asked the question, that's when you answer it.
Yeah.
So they all looked keen, and they looked at me, and I said, "Why did the chicken cross the road?" And there was a wild, joyful chorus of to get to the other side in their own language, which was wonderful. Wonderful little moment of connection.
It was a moment
of connection.
Sounds
silly, doesn't it? But it was.
No,
but then I remember that day you have this organised thing where kids are having a great time. You go outside. Do you remember there was a little girl out there begging just outside the door with her grandmother, I think, and it's such a terrible state.
Yeah.
And you look at it and you think there's nothing I can do for this.
No.
But
there
wasn't
are projects.
Our job was to go home and
that's right. That's right.
Yeah,
but
tell
it's
people
seeing
about
it, isn't it? It's actually seeing it. And again, you mentioned that little girl. I wonder how many people just passed this little girl by, standing there, begging, dirty little thing, and not seeing her anymore. And I know we can talk about the way Jesus saw things, but we must never forget that side of the story, that he touched lepers and he saw people who were just in the crowd and he noticed them.
There was a beautiful moment, wasn't there, which I think we've still got the film of it somewhere, I hope we have, where we were in a bus travelling to somewhere to look at a project.
which is pretty well any day,
a funny
every
old bus,
day.
driven by the workers, I mean. And the bus suddenly stopped, and they pointed to this. There were about 3 children standing on the
three little
street
girls.
corner. 3 little girls, and they were very small. In England, you'd say, "Well, what are these little girls doing here?" And the fellow running it, it just, I don't know. It brings. He got out with a comb
and a flannel.
A flannel.
Yeah.
And he went up to one of these little girls, and he just very gently wiped her face.
Washed her face and
combed her hair.
Brushed her, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was a brush, because it made it lovely and soft.
And talked to her and talked to the other 2.
Yeah.
It's absolutely no reason why you should stop on the way to do something else.
No.
It's so Jesus-ish, isn't it? That you say, you go and do whatever you think is important. I'm going to go and brush this little girl's
I remember
hair.
those 3 little girls standing there as the bus went away. Yeah. You know, it was like the Lone Ranger all over again. Who was that? What was that? But just for that little while, I know, although I know that they did so much, they didn't just do random things like that. The other thing of this week, I mean, what a contrast between soldiers arriving at a house, not asking, not seeing that little family, not seeing that man or his wife, but just delightingly putting a label on that meant that they could actually shoot him and kill him and leave that woman there with just his jumper. She said she was holding his jumper.
Yeah.
I mean, what an extraordinary thing to have come to, that you could possibly do that. And the other thing about this week that I thought kind of connected with everything was Harry Billinge, who, if you're listening from another country, you may not have picked this up at all, but he's the last living veteran from the war that we have in this country. Anyway, he's 96 years old, Harry Billinge. And he was a sapper. He was 18 when he was one of the many who stormed the beaches of Normandy. And he says only 4, he was one of 4 who survived. Now, I know that there will be people survived in different areas of that war who carried all their life a bitterness and an anger against the situation that had caused it. But he's just a little shiny light.
Yeah.
And he spent years going everywhere, collecting for poppy fund, collecting for a memorial. And, I saw an interview with him on the BBC in which he said, love's much stronger than death. And his very last words to his family were, love one another. You remember to love one another. And so...
Has he died now then?
Oh, yes, did you not? Oh, yeah, he died this week. Yeah, he did. He was after a very short illness, and he got to see the memorial that he'd helped raise fund for, because he said they were heroes. They didn't know they were, but the difference that they made, each one of them, and he as 18-year-old was one of them, and he was one of the 4 in his battalion that got back.
It reminds you a bit, doesn't it, of Jesus saying about storing up treasure in heaven.
Yes.
It would be a shock for, say, the man on the bus or Harry Billinge.
I know.
To meet Jesus and Jesus say, it's you.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's you.
So another complete tumble of a week for us, really. And hopefully we haven't coughed, Adrian.
I coughed once, but I'm not doing too bad.
It wasn't too bad.
But I'm going to go and fall to pieces in the corner after this. But I'm glad we managed to talk to you, and I hope enough of you realise we're here to listen. So we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.